All right. I'm going to call the Capital Planning Committee School Research Subcommittee to order Thursday, November 5th, 2020. It is 7:02 p.m. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Southborough Capital Planning Committee Schools Research Subcommittee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at https://www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. All right, happy that's over with. First item on the agenda is review of meeting minutes from October 8th and October 22nd. Thank you both Katura and Kathy for circulating those. I guess, did anyone have any questions on the minutes that were presented?
I was happy with Katura's on mine. I know I spelled Dr. Betancourt's name wrong. 3 T's in there, so I fixed that. So that's
okay.
So I did fix that.
I thought it looked great. I used her format for mine. I was typing them up and I thought, well, look, she has the header and everything, and I just popped it right in. So that was great.
Perfect.
You want me to send you? I don't know how you did that, Katura. I know you did it, but I didn't know how you did it. Did I send it as a Word doc or as a PDF?
You did. You sent us a Word.
Oh, never mind. Okay, so now I know you.
The only 2 things I had, and it was nothing related to content, it's more procedurally, and I can confirm this with Jim if we even need to make any edits from open meeting law, is because we did take roll call votes, do we actually have to specify how I know we went unanimously or abstained, but I think we actually have to spell out our names and aye, nay, or abstain. I'll just confirm that, but I guess with the indulgence of the committee, I can make that edit based on, I think the votes are right. It's just a matter of doing that. And then the only other thing was, I don't know, do we have to list that the agenda was an attachment, given that that's who we ran the meeting off of?
Well, Jason, the reason I do is because I'm lazy. I don't want to retype all the language as far as the remote meeting. So I just say, because I know it's on the agenda. So that's why.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So the answer is no, you don't have to do that. It did just post it, but I'm trying to avoid retyping all that.
Okay. So other than that, I obviously thought they were great and definitely reflective of our meetings. So I guess what I will do is move both sets of minutes subject to the confirmation and potential edit related to the listing of our names in the aye, nay, or abstain. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
The only discussion is as far as your one thing, I would think you wouldn't have to do it on a 3-0 vote. Maybe the one where you abstain from being appointed chairman, you would have to do it. So I think it would apply to one vote, not all of them, but that's just my humble opinion.
I'll just confirm it. No need to. I'll just do whatever they tell us to do. So I won't edit it if we don't need to, but I will edit it if they say we should. Any further discussion?
One more thing. So normally I would do that anyway. I mean, if it's not a unanimous vote, I would put, who voted against it, who abstained. So I think you should do it anyway, even if he doesn't say.
I'll just do it. Any further discussion? All right, roll call. Cook?
Aye.
Martin?
Aye.
And Malinowski is aye. Procedurally for tonight, am I up or for minutes or?
If you read the minutes closely, Jason, it said that Katura and I were doing the minutes, not you.
I just wanted to reaffirm, but yeah.
I was thinking, did I miss my opportunity to?
We had back and forth. I know that's how you wrote it, but I just wanted to I guess I could have just said we agreed to all the minutes as they were written, but I did notice that. But I like to be fair. So you just tag me in if you think I need to do minutes at any point in time.
Okay, that's okay. I'll take tonight. No problem.
Okay. So we're going to go to item 3, which is MSBA and NASDAQ update from the superintendent. I think just to level set and where we left off is we had given preliminary approval to try to go back and get that process underway, but I'll let Greg update us on what's happened since, any other discussions he's had, and how it may be relevant to how we approach the rest of our meeting tonight.
So Kathy, and my assignment was to reach back out to NASDAQ and check on the timeline to see if they could accelerate the timeline. They did share that they could meet a January 10th deadline, which was great news. We did execute the contract with NASDAQ, and they are in process of collecting information. Keith is going to be our contact person, and they've already asked for a substantial amount of information as part of the process.
So Greg, did they say 10th? Because in your email, you said 15th.
I think it's January 10th.
Okay, good.
But I will confirm. I'm actually optimistic that they'll meet a pre-January deadline. So.
And there's nothing you need from the committee to facilitate their work, or if you do, Keith or you will reach out?
Yes, absolutely. And then in terms of MSBA process, so really no news to report in terms of the MSBA process, other than just what we reviewed at last meeting. We're waiting to get information around the statement of interest process and when that window opens. And Keith and I have had some conversations around collecting some sample statement of interest that other districts have drafted in preparation to make sure that maybe there's some preliminary work we can get started with.
So can I interject here, Jason, 2 things that are relevant to what we're talking about?
Sure.
So Keith, one thing I did today is reach out to our town council, Aldo Cipriano, to ask him to put together a summary for us as far as Park Central, as far as all the different prongs of it, because it's not just one court case. There's lots of things. There's several things. I shouldn't say lots, several things going on. 3 things that I know of that affect the ultimate disposition. So I thought, NASDAQ is going to need this, I think, before it's over with. So I went ahead and just reached out to ask him to do this. I haven't heard back from him. So I'll see what he says to me when he calls back, but I think that would be helpful to them to really understand the project. You have trouble in Southborough when you talk to someone about Park Central, finding someone who really has the whole picture of all the things that are going on, because you've got individual private suit, you've got conservation that is working with them. So there's several things going on, and each kind of knows its own little piece of it, but it's real hard to find someone that really can pull it all together and really explain what could happen and what the timing of what could happen is.
Hey, Kathy, on that, you may want to reach out to Mark. I'm pretty sure Aldo recently did a legal update to the board.
He did.
And covered that in a public meeting. So
he did in a way, Jason, but it still doesn't give you what you really need to understand what could, in other words, how many appeals are left if this goes this way. So it's even more. So I know what he said that night, and then actually there was an article written by it. So I got that much, but there's still more to it as far as really understanding how long this could last and what the different ways that could be appealed depending on the answers that they get along the way.
Okay.
I feel like even aside from this whole process, I would love to see a summary like that. It's been very hard to follow.
It is. And you're an attorney. So you're an attorney, right?
Yeah.
So if you're having trouble, think about the average person who's not.
Yeah. Well, right. Exactly. You can look up each case. You can try to figure it out. You can look at some news articles or something, but nothing pulls it all together. I agree. Yeah.
Do you have a second item, Kathy?
I do. So if we go back to the letter that is on Google Docs from MSBA as far as what happens when you close a school. So This is an old letter, and it's still marked draft. Do we know where they actually finalize this?
I don't. That is, I did speak with someone at MSBA, and that is the literature that they forwarded to me. I can follow up, Kathy, to see if there's a more recent, but I would imagine that is the document, and I'm not sure why it's still in draft format. So I can find out.
Tim Cahill hasn't been treasurer in at least 10 years, so this is old. And they're talking about 2008 funding, so I think you're probably looking at something 12 years old. Okay, so this is my specific things. Now, I just want to make sure, Greg, that you are comfortable with two things that get said in here that look to me like they're relevant. So if you look at the executive summary, it says, accordingly, as described below, districts that have closed school buildings within 10 years may be ineligible for authority assistance, and in any event will likely be at a disadvantage vis-a-vis other districts in the competition for authority resources. So I just want to make sure that that didn't bother you.
So I guess the question I have is within 10 years of paying off the bond, 10 years of the project completion, I read it, Kathy, as 10 years of occupancy after the building project was completed, not 10 years after the bond was paid off.
Well,
that was my interpretation.
It says districts that have closed school buildings within 10 years. In other words, within 10 years of making the application for another grant. So you might want to confirm that, again, with telling who we're talking to exactly what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to build a new school, close one and then build a new one, trying to consolidate. But as part of the consolidation, we may need to spend some money on if the older school is the one that survives, we're going to have to spend some money on it. And we would certainly want to get a grant to do, to fund part of the construction cost. So that's the first part of me. I had not read this letter when we met last time. The second thing was it's under Roman numeral I, and it says, or 1, it says, certainly closing a facility cannot create a contemporaneous or foreseeable need for a new facility or even new construction. So I'm hoping that doesn't, the new construction phrase doesn't include rehab, but I don't know.
So Kathy, my interpretation, and again, I can get clarification, is that a district cannot close a school and then build a new school for that school that it just closed. Yeah. So this is I think this would be a reconfiguration and consolidation, which I think is a different scenario than what they're stating. But I can seek clarity to make sure.
I would, because the last thing we want to happen is we end up wanting to spend a bunch of money on NERI and they go, sorry, because of you closing that, we're not going to help here. That would be pretty disastrous. So I would, if I were you, if you could get them to actually send you an email and just say, we understand what you're doing, all's fine as far as being able to submit an application to partially fund whatever you got to do with the remaining school.
I also will just share that the statement of interest process basically articulates what the goals are of the overall community in terms of the school and what problems it's trying to resolve. So, and again, the statement of interest just is reviewed by the MSBA and makes us potentially eligible for the eligibility period. So through that process, I think we'll get some information, but I will call MSBA again. They're very hard to reach right now. So, but they have called back. It's been a 2-week turnaround for answers, but I will seek clarity on that.
And can I add one more caveat to that?
Sure.
So then you could say, well, this is truly theoretical, but we also, as part of this, well, maybe if it's NERI that survives, we will want to build in some flexibility to expand the school down the road if we're wrong with our demographics. So would that be precluded to request a grant for?
Correct. They will not allow you to oversize a school for potential future expansion. However, they will design it so that the design work allows you to easily expand it in future if required. And there have been a number of examples across the Commonwealth where, again, the design has expansion built in, but they won't allow you to get reimbursed for an expansion that you think might happen in 5 to 10 years.
And I get that. And that's not what I meant. I just meant if we decided down the road we needed to add on to Neary because our population is more than we thought, would the fact that we had closed Woodward affect that grant application, which would be actually for new construction?
No, I mean, I guess this all depends on the scenario. My thinking is that it would be an addition or some type of expansion to whatever facilities we're talking about. And that would not be eligible for MSBA reimbursement. That would be on a responsibility of the town. But I also think we're talking about a much smaller scale project.
Interesting. So you think that that we can apply for MSBA grant money to rehab Neary, existing Neary, but we can't apply for an MSBA grant to actually expand Neary?
No. So we can apply for an MSBA. We can submit a statement of interest for what we are trying to accomplish, whatever that scenario is, for our current population, for our known population and our potential projections. I would, 3 to 5 years out. We can't say, well, we think, we need to build 5 additional classrooms above that population size that we're predicting, just in case. What we can do is we can build or renovate a facility to meet the current needs and have the design of that facility allow us to expand at some point in the future if the population size requires that to happen. So the way conduits run, electricity, the heating systems, all those types of things. But that would not be, MSBA eligible, that expansion.
And why not?
I don't know why it wouldn't, in terms of what their criteria is. I just know that, if it's a renovation or a new build and it's within a certain amount of time, again, you're not eligible for MSBA funds for that particular building. You've already have a bond on that building, for example. If the bond was paid off, then you could potentially do another renovation project, I guess, in theory.
Well, so obviously Neary's bond, whatever we owe Neary is about to be paid off, right? All the little.
There'd be a new bond. There'd be a bond on anything you do to Neary. Whether it be a roof, a parking lot, new construction, or rehab. There'd be a new 20-year bond probably. It's just a matter of what's that number that's being bonded.
So if we weren't worried about consolidating, but yet we wanted to expand Neary, this current Neary, it sounds like you're saying we couldn't expand Neary using any MSBA money. That doesn't make sense to me.
I don't think that's what he said.
Oh, good.
I don't.
That makes okay.
It sounds like is it that they won't let you stack bonds on the same building? So if you already have done a project on a building, you're still paying it off, you can't apply to do another project on the same building and stack that on top of what you've already just done. You have to wait until you've paid it off. Is that what you're saying, Greg?
That is accurate. So, for example, we could pay off the town could pay off the bond on Woodward early and then submit if it wanted to expand, Woodward, we could pay off the bond Woodward early and then submit another MSBA project statement of interest for Woodward to expand Woodward, for example. But until the bond is paid off, we really can't do anything with Woodward at this point in time. And that's why we're waiting, I think. But if we were to do anything to Neary other than, if we were to put on a new roof and have a bond through the accelerated repair project, that bond would have to be paid off before we entered into another project with MSBA.
All right. Good enough as far as I understand. So we need to be careful then about how we do this so we don't cut our nose in our face.
Not to add a level of complexity to it, but remember the bonding rules. Even if the town were flush with cash, I don't think you can just pay off bonds. It's not like if you decided to pay off your mortgage on your house tomorrow, the bank would gladly accept your check. There's specific rules that we need someone like Brian Ballantyne to make sure, because I remember, Kathy, they just refinanced some of the really old school bonds, I think like the last 2 months, and they did it with that public safety bond. But that was a very unique situation, and they met very unique criteria. I don't even know what the criteria were, but I just remember Brian walking me through it and saying, wow, I didn't realize it was that restrictive once you enter into that bond.
Okay, so we should definitely keep this in
It's
mind.
definitely out of my area of expertise. The whole bond. When I did read that, Kathy, the MSBA document, I thought it did talk about until the bond is paid off, and I thought it talked about paying. You could pay off the difference of the bond. I don't know. I read it fairly quickly, but again, I think it's a moot point anyway at this point.
So to close this out, Greg, I fully realize they may be difficult to get a hold of, but I guess any clarity we can get, I think we'll probably have better clarity on scenarios that we would envision by the end of this meeting, potentially as we walk through some of the step plan. But I think obviously these meetings are public and they're taped, so we're not trying to hide our intentions. So I think as long as we can throw our intentions out there, even before we do a statement of interest, we obviously want to make sure we're going down the right path and expending the right amount of time and expense in the right spots.
And Kathy, I would, maybe we could do a conference call with MSBA, set up a time. I think the more minds asking the questions, I think the better answers we'll get.
Plus, a call, one question can lead to another question, which is hard to do in an email going back and forth. So I think that would be great.
Related to that point, before we move off entirely, Greg, I know you, Keith, and I had a conversation. You followed up with me on the preschool question that came up last time. Can you, unless you've briefed the others, which I don't think you probably have, can you just walk them through that just so they understand those numbers and obviously how it may be reflected when we get the report in January?
Sure. So after the conversation that we had the last meeting 2 weeks ago, I kind of left, Jason made a comment around the enrollment numbers look like they doubled 3 years ago. And after doing some research, I think what I shared was we did expand the preschool program. We offered different sessions, and therefore there was an increase in preschool population. That was not accurate. So what is accurate is that 3 years ago, as Jason indicated, that is when the Northborough rented space from Southborough, and Northborough's preschool shifted to Southborough space. So of the 88 preschoolers enrolled, 44 of those are Northborough preschoolers. So the actual enrollment for Southborough preschoolers is 44. How it's represented on our enrollment reports is that it looks like all 88 are Southborough students. When you look on the Northborough enrollment reports, it looks like there are 0 preschool students. So we are actually correcting that so that it's actually accurately reflected, both in Northborough and Southborough. So that, again, there's no confusion. That change was made to the enrollment report. We did look back. It was prior to 3 years ago was reported Northborough and Southborough accurately on the enrollment reports.
So I guess doing very rough math, I go back to the comment, Katura, you made in the first meeting when you were trying to look at the PDFs. Mm-hmm. I think 25% of what NESDEC was off was just due to how a change in reporting, not an actual change in statistics. Because I would assume theoretically, if we ran out of space at Finn, Northborough would have to figure out something for their preschool students as opposed to the benefits and synergies of having a district approach.
That is accurate.
Okay. Anything else on MSBA and NESDEC update? So as we go in the decision tree, which I know Kathy circulated to the group, I just wanted to thank Keith, especially and Greg, for his time the other day. I think I mentioned in one of the original meetings, I just am not as familiar with the school buildings as the two of you are. And I spent some time with Keith walking through the three schools. I will say it definitely changed how I may think about how some of the comments I may have on what Kathy put together, in terms of like, are there additional steps we should be adding or parallel steps we should be taking based on timing and all of that. But, it was obviously tremendous to kind of see the stuff in person. It was a day where there was no students in the school. So it's hard to understand how the halls look when they would actually be filled, but you could kind of use your imagination a little bit in terms of the wider hallways at Neary as compared to some of the more traditional sized hallways at the other schools, et cetera. And I think one of the big important things that, I don't think is lost on probably either of you is the size of the superintendent's office at Neary and how much space that takes, right? And, what space that could open up in a variety of situations, depending upon obviously finding that group a new home. And I know there's a rental component to all of this as well. So I just wanted to thank them for their time, because it definitely opened my eyes to some things that I may approach a little differently than I would have just flying blind.
Jason, were you surprised once you saw Neary and Woodward that teachers who know both schools prefer Neary as a rule? It's probably not 100%, but I think it's majority.
I could see why. However, the one thing that really, Keith will probably remember this comment, he just showed me a standard classroom. It was one of the rooms just beyond the superintendent's space. There was an awful hum right next to some poor student's desk. And I'm like, is this the normal hum that comes in? I went on Monday, so it was that colder, blustery day that we had earlier this week. But Neary also showed its age from certain pieces, right? They've done a tremendous job maintaining it, don't get me wrong, but there are certain mechanical aspects of a building that just 50, 60 years in, even if there are replacements that, but the building as a whole, obviously I can understand the layout. I can understand why teachers would prefer it. You can see how the space is being used, the wider hallways, and it's obviously solid to the core. I'm no engineer or construction expert, but that solid brick in the middle of the building. Vice versa, Kathy, obviously my interest was very piqued at Woodward of, if that were a consolidation potential, what that would mean for the town. Keith and I, put on our artistic hats of, how you use this space now, how you could use it, in many different situations too, just thinking out loud. And I am not one that's graphically or inclined to think that way. But I think we'll have a lot of options to present to the community, regardless of where the enrollment figures come out. And obviously a lot of what we've driven by need of the school, educational programming cost, but also just pure mechanicals, like things break over time, and replacing, repairing, renovating versus new, how does that all break down?
Okay.
It was interesting in a COVID setup too, right? So I had to kind of try to also imagine how cafeteria normally would look, as opposed to it looks now. Obviously how, the gyms are being used for storage. And I think it was Neary had the gym as the storage, just that's obviously space that would normally be used in much other ways, different ways.
I'll also add, oops, sorry, Keith, that the classrooms have a lot of items, bookshelves and furniture have been removed from classrooms as well. So those to us look very different, maybe not to a person who's not familiar with the layout of classrooms, but they are very different in this COVID environment.
And it was a Monday midday, and it would have been very much bustling when we were there, Jason. And because it was a remote Monday, we just had our preschool and very few programs in session. So that was also noticeable.
Where did they put all the extra stuff at Finn and Woodward? Is that or is it, yeah?
At Finn, there was really two locations. We did use a portion of the gym, the very back part where the green monster is painted on the wall,
Mhm. Yeah.
as well as a couple of classrooms. We were able to consolidate and get into a couple of classrooms. So we do have furniture in a few of those, as well as a couple of small group spaces that aren't being utilized for in-person learning. And the cafeteria was transformed into a different place because of the distancing requirements. So a lot of the desks that we probably would have needed storage for were now the new layout of the cafeterias with separated desks at 6 feet apart.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
The only other thing I'll say on it before we go down this decision tree is, like, when you look at spaces in the libraries are what really peak both at Neary and at Woodward. If you look at the amount of space that's there for those, right? Those weren't altered for COVID, was my understanding, that's just how they were in a normal environment. Having these 2 grade type schools, right, you have a much bigger space than maybe you actually need for that actual function. So like when you think about using different spaces or this idea of consolidation, right, that was one area that my personal view, and I welcome if I'm off base with this comment, the space was oversized for what, the actual population was, right, in terms of there was a lot of space to move around. And even if you have group activities and stuff like that, there was just a lot of, call it, empty space. And, you just think about function of rooms and functions of use. And, would there have been a better use if there were 2 or 3, 3 or 4 grades in those schools? How would that have looked without causing a need for an expansion or anything like that? So, but I get why it's like it is. But that was one observation, that those were some pretty empty spaces in those 2 areas. Ready to go in the decision tree? So Kathy, I'll turn it to you if there's anything you want to throw out there for consideration. I mean, your thought process was pretty well outlined, but we can go one by one, or if you want to do any primer on this before we go into the details, kind of cede the floor to you to start.
I don't think it needs a primer. I think we just need to discuss each one in great detail and make changes or add to it as far as others' thoughts. But I think we should jump right into it.
Are you in a position to make the change? I know you're not going to be able to make them probably electronically as we go. Or
yeah, I can. I've got it on my other screen, so yes, I can too.
All right.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to change is that first box. 10 years just sounds like a short time to me.
And sorry, Kathy, let me just ask a procedural question. Do all the committee members have the document Kathy's referring to? Do you want to open on my screen, or do you want to have Kathy share, or do you want to just watch it on your own screen?
I have it right in front of me, so it doesn't matter to me, but I don't know what others would like to have.
If you can look at your own so that I can then type on my left screen instead of trying to share it, it probably would make it easier for me to make the changes to it.
Okay. Greg, are you saying something? You're on mute.
Keith, you have access, right, in the folder?
I do, I see it.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Kathy. All right, so you're saying 10, 15 years.
Yes, I think I've got to change that 15 to 10 just to basically be consistent with what the NASDAQ study is going to cover. It's going to give us a 10-year projection. So in other words, it just sounds so short to me let's just assume for a moment that our 2 choices are to close Woodward or to close Neary if we determine we can close the school. And then if we close Woodward for school, that means we know we're going to spend quite a bit of money on Neary. And if I say, so I'm going to pause after I say things, and if someone disagrees, say I disagree, or I don't know that's necessarily true.
Okay.
I don't see how we avoid spending money on Neary, even if we don't close the school. We're going to spend money on Neary, right? Neary needs some work.
Correct.
Okay.
I think everyone's nodding their heads on that with a very strong affirmative yes.
And we all probably know from our prior experience, and when you rehab something, it can cost more than starting from scratch. So any significant rehab of NERI will probably be fairly costly. And therefore, to go to the town and say, we've done the study, we're within a range of probability, we are certain that this will work for 10 years. Somebody might very well, and rightly so, raise their hand and said, wait a minute, you must spend, I'll make up a number, $10 million on a building that you then don't know whether it's going to work after 10 years. So we have to do something else. So I struggle a little bit with this being 10 years. So I think we've got, at some point, we're going to have to address why we think spending the money on NERI still makes sense, even if we can't guarantee things after 10 years. We can't at least speak with much probability after 10 years. So I think I got to change the 15 to 10.
I also think so. The NESDEC study is going to cover the next 10 years, but we can't close anything until 2023.
That's right.
Right? At the soonest. So then are we going to want to get an updated, that's 3 years from now. So then really that's just a 7-year projection at that point and relying on 3-year-old data. I wonder if we're going to want to get something updated at closer to the time before we actually make any concrete moves.
So just to comment on the process again. So the statement of interest is, if it's accepted, then we get invited into the eligibility period. The eligibility period. So we're talking probably we would be invited into the eligibility period if we submitted a SOI in January. Maybe we'd be invited by the fall of 2021. And then from that point, we would have 270 days to conduct our research, which would be an updated enrollment study, a feasibility, it would be more detailed work. And after the 270 days, basically, it would be determined if we'd be welcomed into the next phase of the project. So just getting to that point where a building project is getting off the ground is probably 2 years minimum.
But I'm just trying to figure out how to think about this, because I feel like one train of thought is, can we continue education in the district in 3 buildings versus 4? And then another train of thought is, what are we going to do with the fixing up NERI or rehabbing it or adding on or whatever ends up happening, even if we close a school or not, right? So they're kind of 2 separate things. So the thing that I was just talking about was was basically the first line of thought was, can we scale back to 3 buildings? And then I understand what you're saying, Greg, has to do with, so like that all being in motion, but I'm just more thinking of, I was sticking with Kathy's point about the 10 versus 15 years and making sure that whatever projections we're using are going to be reliable, basically further than 7 years after the Woodward bond, because that does seem very short term. So
it's a great question. And don't forget, let's again say, I really am trying to be very open-minded, but and not assume we're going to close Woodward and do NERI. I think that's probably the harder way to go because of all the work you got to do to NERI to update it. I'm not sure the town would do that much if it took over the building. I don't know. But if you do that, you're probably going to have to, depending on what you do to NERI, you may have to move the kids out for a couple of years to do the rehab, move them over to Woodward. So that's why, so let me ask you this, Greg. When you talk to Dr. Betancourt, I know I did not ask this question. Do they only want to do a 10-year study? Can they go beyond 10 years if they were asked to?
Kathy, I did not ask the question, but I can follow up. I would imagine, again, as we discussed, that the farther out you go, the less accurate the data is. So,
yep. So it may not be, he may say it's not worth it because the probability that they would have to assign for being wrong would be just too high. You can rely on it.
So
Yeah.
the other just comment, and this is experience with the Northborough building project, the renovation project at Lincoln Street. So the students were in the building during the renovation. So with modulars and the scope and the way the building project moved forward. So they closed half the building. The students remained in half the building. They had modulars, and then once that new side was finished, they switched the students, and then so there are ways that they kind of accommodate these renovations without disrupting, the kids where they need to go to school.
Well, Algonquin was done with the kids in place too.
Yeah,
You know?
not ideal, but it
Well, I was going to say lots of complaints, but it was done.
So,
Okay.
so Kathy, on that though, I think we also have to think about whatever gets left behind, right? If you do decide to consolidate, and let's just say it's a short-sighted decision, and 15, 20 years down the road, we still have bonds on the facilities, but we have footprint at least on every site other than Woodward to expand. Not saying that that's the best cost answer, but I think that's half the battle is, as Greg pointed out earlier, in terms of the design element of whatever you do, like unless I'm missing something, Finn absolutely has space to expand if they needed to, right? It may come at the sacrifice of a field, but I think field space is a lot easier to find than buildable land sometimes. And then I'd say too, the Neary site could be totally shifted in many different ways. It's a very flat site except for that hill on the back side of the property and heading towards Trotter. And Keith gave me a whole lesson on all the fill that went in, related to Trotter. And I think Neary's the ideal spot from a building perspective. And like just thinking about what we just went through, Kathy, on that hill on 85, like that was a lot of work, the site work, where I don't think you have that issue at Neary to be able to add on in the future, or Finn. They're both very flat parcels.
I agree with
The
you.
only spot you would not be able to add on to is Trotter, because I think it encroaches. The only place to go would be where the leaching field is, and I don't think you can expand that out any further. I think I remember that from the 2004 expansion that was done to that building.
I think you're right. And I was going to leave this to the end, but I'll go ahead and say I called and talked to Paul Pazinski because he was involved in 13. And he's going to send us things that we're going to need at some point, which is the septic information, the flow, what it can handle, the number of students that it was designed for. So, because we're going to have to work with that to do this. So that's coming, and we'll need it at some point. Okay, so the first box.
Kathy, can I just ask a quick question? Keith,
Yeah.
What is the enrollment capacity of Trotter?
I want to say 670. If I have that correct, let me double check.
Maybe in the
I think it's in the report.
670 because of the septic.
Yes,
Current enrollment is about half that.
correct. Well, yeah.
And, last time when we came up with the permutations as far as how to move the grades around, there was one where you added a grade to Finn, one where you added a grade to Trotter, and it was going to work within the septic capacity. So, but the septic was absolutely looked at to make sure of that.
So I went to the report. I found the septic capacities. Trotter was 720, Neary was 520, Woodward was 620, and Finn was 635. So
Jason is going to tell you that Woodward, though, that is going to be an outdated number, right, Jason?
correct. I was just going to say
It's
that.
actually probably a better number because it's a brand new system.
Right.
I don't know what I don't know what it is now with the combination with the public safety.
We can find it, but the good news there is that's a brand new system.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to go down to I said, does the projected student population of Southborough pre-K through 8 for the next 10 years support closing either Woodward or Neary based on the NASDAQ demographic study? So to me, that's our threshold question. That's what we're trying to answer first. So the answer, if the answer is yes, we'll have to determine, I'm not yet saying how we get to yes, but let's say we get to a yes. Will the committee recommend closing one of the schools based solely on that information? Are we going to use anything else that's quantitative, qualitative? Are we just going to look at that and say, okay, we know we can do it, we keep going?
I think there's got to be more than just that, given the, the visibility that I think it's a step, but, very supportive of getting the NESDEC numbers. But I also kind of have in my head, like a worst case, a best case, in the middle of the road already of where this thing's going to come out, right? Like we kind of know what's happened over the last 10 years. Unless someone's aware of some trend other than, Kathy, some of the theories you've thrown out about Park Central, like maybe now is the right time candidly to be looking at this, given my understanding is real estate is flipping like none other in Southborough right now. So are all those houses with no kids in the school system and being filled with 3? Like we should be able to get data like that pretty quickly as part of this process. But I would think that even if we recommend closing one of the schools solely based on the NESDEC results, you also have to look at what they're trying to do from an educational perspective longer term, right? Like is having 2 grades per school essentially the right answer? I'm leaving Trotter off to the side unless someone disagrees with that. But is having 2 grades really the model going forward? Candidly, I haven't studied a lot of school districts in the state, but when we moved to town, that was probably the biggest shock, and we didn't realize it candidly when we bought our house. But I'm sure there was good reason for why it was said. So, like, that's obviously a question for Greg, Keith, and the school committee to answer. But I would think we'd want to have a view on that. Like, is having 2 grades in each building still the right answer, or is there other benefits to consolidating? What are the cost implications? And, what are the various permutations of it depending upon the building that's in question, right? Like given the conversation we just had about Neary. And if Neary's not the one that's closed, then it's going to need significant work. So that number, whatever that number is, and whatever the projects are over that 10, 15, probably 30-year time period, because we're basically going to be signing up for another 20 or 30 years in Neary, is my guess in that instance. Like, what does that look like? Because I think you got to take a 20 to 30 year view from a cost perspective, is at least how I'm approaching it, because that's going to be the life of your bond.
I totally agree with that. So that's why it's not really a 10-year thing. It's really.
Yeah, it's an interesting paradigm, but I'm also, intrigued by the NESDEC data. Or at least I'm heading, I don't know if this is where Couture was going with her comments, is like, I'm not sure that we're just like a dead set no on the left side of the page. Like, I think there's other things that need to be looked at, even if the data says you can't close these schools. Like, is there a better way to arrange them, right? Given the Northborough pre-Ks in the school, the superintendent's office is taking up a whole grade. We're still gonna have to spend a lot of money on Neary to bring that up to speed. The town still has other needs outside of school population. How do you get that all to fit together? And Kathy, some of this goes back to our full committee, but that's part of my question as we think through this is, are there other things that we should be working on the side so that, like, once this data comes in, it's not just the schools will have to make their decisions, and there are certain things that will fall directly with Greg, Keith, and the school committee. But I think there's other things that may sway them one way or another. They may be indifferent on one thing or another, but there may be a compelling argument from the town side, or vice versa. There may be something that's very persuasive from the school side that makes any of the town side just completely moot, and we'll just have, like, inform, just go deal with that stuff on your own and kind of go down your paths.
Okay, I didn't think you were going to say what you just now said, but I agree with that last sentence. So just to be clear, are you saying that if this report comes back and we go, and it looks like we really can't close the school, it's too risky, and we're done, we can't close the school, are you saying that the work of this committee is done, you're not saying that this committee then would then, okay, say, okay, we're going to still have 4 schools and we're going to talk about how to rearrange those 4 schools in some meaningful way?
I would think our charge would have to be refined. We can certainly make sure that this is still the right membership and whether it still should be a capital planning subcommittee as opposed to something that the school committee leads. But my personal intent would be yes, because I think that's an important part of the overall equation of even if you say, no, we can't close it, we need all the space we have because of something that's going to happen 7, 8 years from now, we still have significant capital needs at Neary in particular. There are other, all the schools, but how do we address that and plan for the future? Because you're not going to just be able to pick up pre-K and move it. It's obviously in the right spot to begin with. I'm just throwing that out there because there's very few permutations you can take of this. You know, is there space in Trotter? Like, should another grade go to Trotter? I don't know, right? Like that's just educational sort of decisions on how these schools are run. Obviously, I'm sure Keith has a very strong view on that. But I would think our work needs to continue. It just is going to maybe be going down a different path. But I guess, Katura, I don't know what view you have on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess my thoughts are, my initial thought is, I think it's hard to proceed down a lot of these paths without the NESDEC data, because I feel like we're just sort of spinning our wheels a little bit because we just don't know what it's going to say. I mean, and I agree. I don't think it's the one and only factor, but it's a really big factor, I think. And at this point, we really don't. We have no clue really what it's going to say for our town in particular. We know what the general information is that they've given us, but that's only reliable to a certain degree, as we've seen. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's hard. What I was saying before wasn't necessarily going down the path of closing a school. It was more just along the lines of, we have the enrollment info and the idea of closing a school versus what are we going to do to Neary anyway, unless that's the one we end up closing and the town decides it wants to make investments in other buildings for the other purposes, which doesn't really seem like the direction this is going, but I agree, we should keep an open mind. And then as far as the educational needs, that was kind of what I was trying to say when we were talking about the study our last meeting or the first meeting, which is, I don't know what's changed from 2013 to today as far as how we use the buildings. I don't think we've had a huge, big radical changes other than maybe moving the preschool in. But other than that, it seems to me that the educational programs are probably pretty similar. So the analysis that was done then is probably pretty similar to where it would come out today, given the current enrollment. So, yeah, Kathy, did you want to say something?
So where I thought Jason was going, which is right up your alley because you wear both hats. If we determine that the demographic projections are so much that we really cannot close a school in good conscience, then I think what Jason's saying, then we turn our attention to then, especially Neary, what has to be done on the capital side to upgrade Neary. Possibly the other schools too. So we just go back to the normal capital plan of the school. However, there's already a capital planning committee that is a subcommittee of the school. That's what Katura is on. So I don't know that we wouldn't just be duplicating that effort at that point. Now the parent capital planning committee that Jason chairs, that I'm on, certainly will need to weigh in on what the capital planning committee of the school is going to recommend. But I'm not sure that they would be doing the legwork that you guys would do to come forward with what you think needs to be done to these schools. So it just looks to me like that would be duplicate. I can never say that word. That would duplicate their efforts, Jason, if we were to say, no, we can't close the school. So now let's focus on what needs to be done to maintain the schools and probably improve Neary.
But so I agree that's duplicative in that example, but let me give you the other example that I think we would be short-sighted. And again, we can figure out who the right team is to work on this or right committee, but it has to be part of the decision trees. I guess what I'm advocating for is if we decide that we can't close a school with good conscience, from an educational perspective, this is where I need Greg, Keith, and Katura to weigh in. Would you still reevaluate how you're delivering education from a 2-grade model at each of these schools? Or would you just live with the infrastructure you're dealt with? Because there is a permutation, Kathy, I would say, if there was a thought that the educational model is evolving, that you still deal with NERI, but you may be dealing with NERI in terms of building a new one with the intent of consolidating while still meeting everything you need to meet from what the NESDEC report tells you.
Yeah, but I just would add that I think Jason, you started the first meeting really talking about the larger context, not looking at any project in a singular fashion. So not just looking at NERI, but looking at what is that master capital plan, and where does, regardless of what happens, where does NERI fit in terms of the timing of what happens across the larger landscape of the town master plan that's happening. So that is something that I think if it was a no, then the question for us, for the school committee, would be, we need, how does a project, or when does a project fit in with a town's timing of its larger capital plan? And that's, I guess, a question that I would want to know, because I would imagine that these projects are sequenced in a way that they're timed. So as bonds come off and on, that it's kind of cyclical in its work. In terms of thinking about if the answer was no, would we look for a different grade configuration? If we're doing any other grade configuration, I'm not sure the answer to that question. Thinking out loud, I would not want to move another grade level to Trotter. So I would not want to have 4 grades at Trotter. I think, therefore, the only shifting you could do is you could shift grade 3 to NERI if it fit. So you had 3, 4, 5, but then you have grade 2 at Woodward, and so there's not a lot of options in terms of shifting. So if we were to do a consolidation, ideally, from a programmatic, again, just brainstorming, ideally what we'd have is we'd have a K1, 2, 3 grades, and a 3, 4, 5. And that's a balance between a pre-K through 5 building, and students would have one less transition. And then the coherence that would take place as a result of, grade 3 teachers being with grade 4 teachers, with grade 5 teachers, is you could maximize resources better. So there's just a lot of positives to that.
So that's interesting that you said that. So I'm making note of that. Jason, when you said you and Chelsea might not have made the decision to move here if you'd understood the 2 grade per school configuration, is that because when you have multiple children, you don't want 3 different schools at one time? Is that what you were getting at?
I just said we didn't know about it, but we had literally just gotten married and hadn't gotten to that whole kid phase yet. So, we picked Southborough for its schools. We didn't pick it because it had pre-K through, 1, then 2 and 3, 4 and 5. That was just something, as we learned more about the town, we were like, oh, because that's just the towns we individually grew up in. So that was all. We absolutely still would have chosen it, because I don't think that's a determining factor. But if there are benefits to an education delivery model and we can make our education system better than it already is, we'd be silly not to at least, and that's where I'm relying on the educational experts here. We'd be silly not to have that be part of the factoring in of all this. Greg, you said K through 2 potentially.
Pre-K through 2, yep.
Okay, pre-K, okay.
Yep.
So,
I guess there are a lot of iterations, and that would be the study that needs to be done. So you could look at NERI and Woodward, as, you could do each of those schools as mini neighborhood schools, right? So you could do, there's just a lot of iterations, 2 through 5, and I guess that is the work the school committee. We haven't gone on any journeys yet in that area, other than the one that was done in 2013, right, Katura?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Other than considering neighborhood schools, which was also done years back, when the decision to build the new Woodward and the new Charter were being discussed. So if we stick, I mean, we're adding a lot of variables here.
Yeah.
If we stick to what could happen if we were to close a school, it sounds like, Greg, you think that 2 choices would be to move 2nd grade to Finn, move 3rd grade to Neary, or move 2nd and 3rd grade to Neary. You didn't say the last one though, so I missed. But so
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is I agree with Jason that if you have a no, that does not end the process. The process then becomes what is the scope of any type of school project to deal with Neary's capital needs, and how does that fit into the larger town plan, regardless if a school is closed or not. I guess that's what I'm saying.
And does that open up opportunities to consider different configurations that might be advantageous in some way?
Exactly.
Right.
You don't want to do the configurations until you have the enrollment data so that you could show phasing and all of that with obviously any intent of any sort of construction, not interfering with education, if at all possible.
But I don't see how you reconfigure if you don't close the school, because if you were to move a grade out of Woodward, you'd be left with 1 grade at Woodward, which
I wouldn't suggest that. That doesn't seem.
That doesn't make sense, right?
That doesn't make any sense.
And you wouldn't move 1 out of Neary either, because you'd have the same thing. And maybe you wouldn't move 1st grade either. So I don't know what you could do to reconfigure with 4 schools. But I'm not the education person here. But going back to what I'm trying to get to here with the no. So I said committee work is complete. Jason is disagreeing with that, so that's what I'm trying to flesh out.
Let me tell you what I would propose putting there, with the indulgence of the committee, is joint meeting with school committee in capital planning to discuss results and to present, which we would have this group would have a meeting before, options on path forward. We don't need to come up with those options tonight, but I think we've started everyone's creative juices, right, of what those options could be. And I think we then come back together as a committee. If we hear it trending this way, right, one of the final reports this group could make is, hey, we think just stay status quo and here's why. Everyone accepts that and we dissolve. Or some new subsection could be charged with the configurations, reno, new, or you may circle back to do nothing and here's why. But I think there's a whole other series of steps that come under the no that I just want that we can articulate in a future time period. And we can leave open the possibility of this committee continuing, a new committee continuing, but I think it's an important checkpoint back with our, I'll call it master committees, for a sanity check, because it allows capital planning to weigh in from the town side, school committee to weigh in not only from a capital perspective, but from an overall educational perspective.
Okay, so this is what I changed it to. So under the no, so now we've decided we're not closing the school, right? The projections won't support it. So joint meeting with capital planning committee and school committee to discuss options going forward.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, one thing that could happen, again, we've got lots of choices here. It probably would help the school capital committee that Katura is on to have someone on the town side involved, maybe even from day one, once we decide that we're not going to close the school, so that at least you would have some information as far as what the overall capital plan of the town looks like, so you could try to make sure you can work within it and not, propose something that we just can't do.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You know, I'm looking at the decision tree and I'm thinking, so we have the first question. I actually think the two branches that follow after that are, yeah, where it says yes. What I think what you're basically talking about there is, yes, closing a building without having to do major reconfiguration or other adjustments, right? It's more like, can we just fit everybody in the remaining 3 buildings and do regular maintenance as we go forward? And then the no is really pointing toward, it's not that we couldn't close a building, but it also includes, you know, it's no, we can't close a building if we're not going to make any big changes, but we could close a building if we're going to do some sort of big reconfiguration, right? So the no really encompasses possibly closing a building depending on what the capital, you know, the projects are that we decide to take on.
So I'm just going to respectfully disagree with what you just said. The no,
Okay.
we're saying no because we've got a study that says we got too many kids. We can't close a school. We can rehab a school. We can improve a school physically, but we can't close them. We need our 4 schools to accommodate the projected student population. So that's
the
what the no is.
space as currently exists in the schools to meet the enrollment.
Yes.
Right. So it's almost like maybe what Jason's talking about then and what we're all talking about is kind of like a third branch. It's either a yes, a no, or let's.
You're right. And I'm going to add that because what Jason says is important. I'm assuming we're answering the question based on our current 4 schools floor plans, right?
Right.
And not that we're going to say, okay, well, then we'll just double the size of a school to be able to go to 3 schools. So we really haven't talked about doing that. We just talked about if we were to increase the size of a school, it's really going to be Erie that we'd have to do. Okay, so I want to modify this a little bit.
And are we agreeing? I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. It's going to be about how we present it. But are we agreeing that that third branch is to be defined by this committee if we sense a trending towards no? Like we could be here for 10 more meetings,
Yeah.
right? But we may not need to go down that route because there may be a new route based on enrollment, which may have some of the same considerations. Is that what we're?
I think that sounds right. And I also think that you're right to say that it would include someone from capital planning also in conjunction with people from the schools, you know, and not even necessarily school committee. I mean, I know we'd all be happy to weigh in, but, you know, we're not the experts on, you know, grade level configuration and, you know, how that should all be put together. I mean, I know I would look to, you know, Greg and his wonderful people who work with him who know how this all goes. And I'm sure everybody, you know, I'm sure the committee would agree. So I think, in my mind, it starts with that as far as looking at, you know, what might be a better configuration if we, you know, I mean, everything can be improved, right? So maybe there's some really ideal thing that they would come up with. And then we look at whether it's feasible or maybe there are a couple of iterations and we see how much each of them might cost, that kind of thing, along with capital. But I do think it starts with the schools, that part of it.
So this third way to go, which is, okay, current footprints won't accommodate closing a school, but taking one of the schools, maybe the bigger school, and expanding that school right away could do it.
So which are you referring to as the bigger school? Keith and I actually had this is a test, by the way.
Okay, well, I know what I think it is, but
So what is it?
That's the question. I think it's Neary.
Keith?
Incorrect. Woodward.
Really?
Slightly, not by much. There, you would think so, but Woodward does have the larger footprint.
And in there, you're including the superintendent space?
I am.
Okay. Huh, I'm surprised. I thought that we had
Collectively,
included that Woodward was smaller than Neary.
The full size of the building, Woodward, is a little larger by square footage. I thought it
Okay.
was until I checked.
It's just funny. We talked about this the other day. That's why I had to.
Because I told Jason, I responded, I said Neary, and then I had to get it corrected. It was Woodward.
Well, I said that at one of the last two meetings and no one corrected me.
But Jason's comment earlier too around the library at Woodward, compared to the library at Neary, just the space is used differently, very differently.
Yeah, Jason and I were talking about just how many different uses the Neary library space has been over the years, from a computer lab to a multimedia center to a lot of different variations. It's been interesting over the 20 years I've been in the district to see that morph.
Well, they call it libratory now, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so is the third arrow going to point to a second no and say committee will propose a footprint of the surviving building that would accommodate the population?
Mhm.
Jason?
Yeah, the only reason I'm slightly hesitating is the use of the word committee, given Katori's basically said she will. I don't like. I'm happy to offer an opinion, but I'm not an educational expert, so it's more the school administration would have to do that. We can help facilitate it, but
You could just say schools. I mean, that's, that kind of combines.
yeah.
But what I said under the first no is pretty broad. Joint meeting with CPC and school committee to discuss options going forward. That can include that option. We can expand a school if you really want to get down to 3 schools here. Because remember, unlike 2013, the town most likely does have a use for a building. So it's not like it's going to be mothballed. It's going to be used and probably fairly productively as far as what could happen there. So you still may want to close it just because the town really could use a building.
Well, and also, I think I alluded to this too at another meeting, but right, because then at that point, the town doesn't have to put all sorts of capital money into all these other money pits, I guess, is that some of them, right? They're kind of.
Well, and there may be revenue on the other side too. I know that's an uncommon term in this town, but
Right.
so Kathy, now I see where you're going. So I'm going to raise this point now. I was going to raise it later, and it's probably a decision for capital planning more broadly, but I want the reaction, especially from Katura, Greg, and Keith, is to inform some of these decisions. Capital planning would need to be able to educate everyone how a space like Woodward in particular could be used, right? Like in actually have some semblance of a drawing of if you made no capital improvements to that facility and you just accepted it as is, schools removes all their equipment, everything, what that would look like, who you actually could fit in there. Like, is it big enough for a superintendent's office, recreation, youth and family, and senior center, and then you're full? Or do you have 10,000 square feet for townhouse type needs, or 10,000 for community space type, et cetera? So while it's not this committee's decision ultimately to do that, my question for capital planning is going to be, but I want this subcommittee to be on board with it, is do we have an architect walk through Woodward now, or is it way too premature just to tell us what the spaces could potentially be used like in an as is condition? And I think that's very short money. So leave the money question off to the side. But is that way too premature, or is that a necessary component to be able to feed back in to this decision tree when everyone's trying to look bigger picture and not at one item in silo?
Well, not to talk too much here. That was one of my suggestions. Is I think we need an architect. So I was actually going to say that because, Jason, if we don't have a use for a closed school, then why are we doing this? To me, the main reason that we're trying to do this is because we think we've got use for a building. We've got lots, just what you said, the exact things you said that might go into one of these buildings. Because if you don't have that need, then what are we doing this for? Because remember,
Well, we have the need. The question is it the right facility?
Yeah.
Everyone agrees we have the need.
okay, and if the right answer is one of the two schools would be great to do what we need to do, right? I don't see how we get there till we do have an architect to help us say, well, this is what you could do, because I'm like you, I don't, I'm the accountant too, I don't have the imagination. But because we're not
It's sad
doing
that's how people think of CPAs, right?
we're not doing this to save money. What I will continue
Oh,
to,
that's good.
we just got to assume you don't save money by consolidating schools. Your costs are still pretty much the same all the way through. So this is not a money saver just to go down to 3 schools. We're doing this, I think, at least in large part because the town has use of the building. It would save them from building a new building for things that it needs to do. So I think that if you don't understand what one of the 2 buildings would be used for, I don't say, I actually had that down there, then I took it out.
All right.
Because
So I want to hear though, Greg, Keith, and Katura's reaction to that. Like, is that too premature from your perspective, from a school perspective?
And I would extend it to that you probably should have an architect tour Neary as well. Again, because the buildings were designed for a single purpose for schools. So although it sounds like a great idea to now convert it to alternative spaces, there might be an unforeseen cost of doing that. It might not just be, we're going to move in and just use the space as is for town offices or superintendent offices. So I think it is a good data point that needs to be collected to add to the bigger decision.
All right, so we're talking about that on Monday, Kathy, at capital planning. So I already have a proposal in motion, but I didn't want to bring it if there was objection. So Katura, any thoughts from you on that?
I think it makes perfect sense. I think we may as well get as much information as we can right now while we're gathering information. We're waiting for the demographic study. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of get it all in and then use that to hash out all the decisions once we have it.
Okay.
So Jason, under the question, will the committee recommend closing one of the schools based solely on the NASDAQ study results? You have said no, so I've started adding things on there as far as what else we would look at besides just the population. We start the population, we can do it, right? What else we're going to look at? Sounds like one of them is we're going to look at what the use of the building would be for the town, right? Because think about it. We got to think about town meeting, we got to think about school committee, but especially town meeting. You can't get up and say, well, we decided to close a school and then not be able to tell them what we're going to use the school for, right? You got to tell a story here, and you got to be pretty specific. We're going to put the senior center, just like Jason said. We're going to put recreation. We're going to put youth and family services. So we definitely have to. This has got to be part of it.
Can I just add, and I think, and it might be in here, Kathy, I think also somewhere in this decision tree has to be programmatic and educational needs, again, in addition to the NASDAQ data. I think that is key. And I think the 2013 report, that was a major part of that report, was really around the type of programming that was moving forward at the time.
And it was because that committee was dominated by educational people. You had a couple of finance people there from the town, but it was mostly educational people. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Greg, at some point down the chain. That definitely.
So fully agree, right? That goes to the educational aspects of this. But when do you do that? I don't know the answer to that, but regardless of what the NASDAQ data tells you, I think we've already agreed that there's other potential permutations that it could take that would need that sort of educational footprint of, what is the best in class way to structure a elementary school system these days based on population size of Southborough. So Greg, would your intent be to wait for the NASDAQ data in January? Not that you don't have enough on your plate now, or is there something your team would do now? Or, because I don't know, Kathy, obviously I can't see your screen, but I guess the way I'm thinking about it is this whole bottom right part of this decision tree may not necessarily exist, and it's going to be more a bunch of concurrent work streams that could be going on while we wait for NASDAQ to at least be in a position to start to inform, how you build out beyond that. But that's.
So I agree that, so I put a list of things we can do in parallel to that we don't want to sit here for 2 months waiting for the study. So I agree with that. But I still think we come back to these questions because we got to still know what our role is. That's what I was trying to do. What is our role here? Do we stop at some point and then hand it back to the school committee and say, we've done our job. Yes, you can close the school. We think Woodward should be closed. This is why. Then do we go forward? Do we do the floor plan? Do we show the configuration of the grades? So I still think that the right side is relevant, Jason, that we're going to point back to that once we.
I just say going more in this, it's more stylistic maybe. It's maybe more a bunch of concurrent things that are going on. It's not like if yes, then no down this right side of the page. It's more, I don't know, like I'm trying to think through, like if any one of us were making a presentation and thinking about the people that are going to be the other side of the table asking the questions, right? And ultimately, to your point, Kathy, of town meeting, I don't know how you make a decision to close a school based on one data set or based on without seeing the big picture, because otherwise this group as constituted is not the right group to be doing it, right? Like you probably would have gone about in a much different way. So I'm just thinking more like what is the right level of data that we're going to go back for, like decision point 1 to the school committee in capital planning, and where are those checkpoints and where are the agreed upon checkpoints? Because I don't know, I think I would bring this back to capital planning, and I'm sure Couture would bring it back to school committee and say, hey, do we have this right? Like, is this where you school committee want to be weighing in and voting? Or is there a step earlier in the process you wanted to weigh in on? And is this the right things you want to be hearing about when we come back? Because what I don't want to do is go make a presentation and, I don't know, I'll pick on Roger as the chair, right? Have Roger say, well, that's great, but I would have liked to have looked at these other 5 things. And now we don't have time to complete that. And Greg's trying to sit there coming up with a statement of interest. And I imagine part of the statement of interest is going to be community level support and what the level of dialogue is. I don't want to be sitting here in May doing that because we kind of weren't doing things in parallel. That's all I'm trying to advance, or make sure we're thinking about all those things and get stakeholders beyond this group that's on the screen to weigh in.
So then how about this? While we're waiting for the study to be done, we just said we are not going to just use the study results to make this decision, right? So why then would we in parallel go forward with the other things that we think should be considered with the school committee's blessing? I mean, they need to tell us, I think, what those things are. Yes, we've got Greg here, we've got Keith, and we've got Couture, but I would think, we want to get the school committee to huddle and let us know what else they want us to consider for this decision, which is what we're trying to build over here under this no. They would not come back with, CPC can do the use of the building for town, right? That's our job.
Yeah, we'll take care of that.
They certainly can talk about, programmatic educational needs, what they'd like to see this accomplish, what it could accomplish at the same time. So all the things that are a little bit more qualitative than quantitative.
Yeah, I think that, and Greg can weigh in too, but the way I'm envisioning this as far as keeping the school committee informed is that I believe we have this as a standing item on our monthly meeting agendas at this point. We have our next meeting is this coming Monday night, and we'll give an update on what this subcommittee has been doing, present where we are right now, and then we can solicit feedback on. And I'm sure Greg at the same time can talk to the people on his team and kind of get a sense from the administrative perspective, and then we can put our heads together and bring it back to this subcommittee about other things to consider.
No, I agree, and I think also convening the school committee capital planning subcommittee too, to to vet some of these ideas and to think about this decision tree as well would be helpful.
So Couture, who's on that with you, that subcommittee?
Roger and Jen Primack. Lane. Yeah. So we just had a meeting last week.
And I guess, was there what dialogue happened there? We actually were with George Selectman, so I wasn't able to listen in.
Yeah, so this is all, I mean, what we're doing here in this is fairly fresh. So this didn't really have a lot of impact on our discussion. We really had we have an ongoing capital plan. So we reviewed that. We looked at the timing of the projects that will need to be done. We talked about the MSBA, timeline, statements of interest and all of that. I don't have it in front of me, but I know.
You talked about that, Couture, for this project or just other things you're doing?
No, just in general. I mean, this is just the general capital plan. We just did the Finn boiler with MSBA assistance, as you know. So I think one of the upcoming projects is the Neary roof. I mean, that's just looming on the horizon. So that I think that's the closest one. Oh, I know what we did do. Sorry, it's coming back to me. So we did try to sort of space things out so that we weren't going to try and address that immediately, depending on what happened with this analysis. So we tried to plan things out so that it's all in consistent with what we're doing here. Is that right, Greg?
It is. We pushed some of the capital projects, specifically at Neary, like the roof and the driveway project, out to let this process move forward. So that was, I think, the major discussion that took place.
So is it fair just to dot an I and cross the T, given some of the emails you and I had, Greg, from my capital planning seat, for FY22, when we go to annual town meeting, the only potential school capital item for Southborough schools would be anything related to this decision tree. Like if we needed engineering or additional funding around that to do further work related to the MSBA statement of interest. Is that fair?
That is accurate.
Okay.
In 2013, the conclusion was we could close the school, but they didn't. So they did look at other things besides population. One of them I know was they were afraid that the demographics were wrong. But there were other things too, and I wasn't privy to that discussion. So I don't know what other things bother them about doing this. If I had to be frank, I think that they went into this not really wanting to close the school committee, but they felt like they had to at least take a look at it because there was pressure on them to take a look at it from various people in town. So that was kind of the reason they did it. And so therefore, once the study was done and it was shown that it wasn't a slam dunk to close the school, that there was risk in doing it, that was enough for them to say, we looked at it and we're done and we're not going to do it. So this time, my guess is that won't be the thinking the school committee. I think there's a little bit more open-mindedness about doing this. But I don't know what else those criteria should be other than what we've said so far, which isn't a whole lot. Whatever they want to accomplish as far as programmatic and educational needs. I said, what is the ideal number of grades per school? I don't know. If you started from scratch, what would you do as far as grades go? I don't know the answer. That sounds like Greg thinks fewer schools is better because of one less transition and da-da-da. So I don't know. They may say, look, we really do think we'd have a much better school system if we had 3 schools. We used to have 3 schools here. So what we're saying, I think, is, and Jason, correct me, is that as we're waiting for NASDAQ to do the study, that we should go to the school committee and basically say, what other factors do you want us to consider in making the recommendation that we're supposed to be making as far as closing school besides the school population?
Yeah, and the other way I've been thinking about this too, and we can maybe talk to the rest of the school committee about this, and I'd be interested in Greg's thoughts. But, the study that was done in 2013, what it looked at in terms of, projected population in X year and the impacts if we were to close at that population level, project, and so on and so forth throughout the years. By the time it got to the point where they concluded that a school could be closed with little to no educational impact, that was when I think whoever was doing the study was comfortable that we wouldn't have to downsize the art room to an art cart, and we wouldn't have to forego the room where the kids who need it have lunch bunch, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's definitely something that would be worthwhile to get feedback on, whether, anything has changed about that, maybe even just to confirm that those same factors that were looked at then are still important now. And then if those were to change, that would negatively impact the quality of education, that type of thing.
No, I think that's exactly spot on, Katura. In terms of looking at, could the population fit in NERI? Yes, but would that mean art on a cart? Would that mean, having 4 lunches instead of 3 lunches? Would that mean, not having a music room, having music in the classroom? So all those programmatic impacts are exactly what we'd want to look out and play it out as the population expands and contracts.
And that was done. So literally the floor plans of the school were taken, and that was actually done. I don't remember the lunch thing, Greg, but we certainly talked about music room and art room and gyms and stuff like that. That was absolutely done. That committee was much bigger than this committee is. And on that committee, there was a lot of educational expertise, right, Keith? And so that absolutely was a focus as far as making sure that the educational quality of classroom size was part of it, was not compromised at all.
So Kathy, are you in a point where you could share what you have on your screen, or are you not comfortable doing that?
A little sloppy looking, but I could do it.
I'm just looking for, at least I don't want to speak for Tura, but I'm just looking for big picture concepts, because I guess if you're comfortable doing that, I'll figure out how to get you the share screen thing. But then Katura, you're saying you're meeting Monday night as a broader school committee?
Yep.
So we ironically as capital planning are meeting Monday night too, but I guess if you're comfortable taking the concept back, then just to start to get ideas and just say, hey, give me ideas now. But, and I'm happy to join for that conversation. I just don't know how it would line up on your agenda. If we start at 7:30, so I don't know.
30.
So I could technically join, but depending on where it fell on the agenda, or if you want to bring it back to us, or have the school committee members just email us if they think of something on the fly. I think the more people that are thinking about what they want and what their questions may be, at least we can say, we didn't answer it and here's why, or we did answer it, but here are the other steps you need to take. I think that's at least where I'm falling out on this.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. I'm sure people would be happy to give their feedback. And I think it's really worth beginning to really think about that and start getting those ideas out there. So, yeah.
So this was this was another note I made. I was going to throw out to Keith. I'm not sure what you're going to say about this one. Again, I think this is a pretty small committee to do what we're doing right now. I think this is going to be a lot of work for this committee to truly do what we just described, which I think is the hardest part of it all. Truly understanding how you would format, the schools if you were to close one. If we decide, if we pass the first hurdle, yes, we could do it based on population. We look comfortable. It looks like we could do it. If we get past that, then the second part, which is then how to do it, which is what I said over here, is that part of our job to basically not only recommend letting people know we can close them, but basically recommending what to do, close what, and this is how we do it, and this is how it all works. Giving people one choice or two choices or three choices as far as how to do it. So Keith, what is our friend Linda Murdoch doing these days?
Teaching music lessons and enjoying retirement.
She's healthy and everything as far as you know?
Oh, she's doing great. I talk to her frequently.
I just think that unless, and I'm looking at Keith because he knows her best. Greg, do you know Linda? Was she here when you were here?
Oh, you just muted yourself, Greg.
I met her once, so no, I do not know her.
All right, so I'm addressing this at Keith because Keith, you certainly have veto power here. I just thought that asking her to join this committee as ex officio might be something that would be very helpful as far as the piece that we're talking about now, the qualitative piece, as far as truly making sure we don't compromise educational needs, we've got the right size classrooms, et cetera.
Oh, it's an interesting question. I'm sure, Greg and I can think that through and see, what the options would be. And I don't know if she'd be interested.
She might not, but
she might want to say, no thanks. I think she's appreciated her distance. Let's put it that way.
I also would share that on staff we have a lot of expertise,
right?
So I don't. Although she'd be welcomed, I'm not sure what value add it would bring, other than she might be able to give us some history of the process that was used that sounded like it was pretty effective in 2013.
And that's exactly what I think that she's got the history, she's already done it, and so she could probably pick up and get this done a lot faster than someone from scratch. By the way, just as an aside, Greg, we were talking about the spelling bee. Linda Murdoch won it 4 years in a row, so we finally had to fire her and make her a judge. So she's got quite a memory.
So on that, Greg actually already answered my question, but Greg, is there any value to having someone on your team start to think through today with what the spaces we have and the enrollment data if the school committee came to you tomorrow and said, we're closing a school, we can figure out what that is in a second. Show me how it would look for the grades. Like, is there any value to having them do that with your current enrollment? Or is it better because what I was thinking with that question, just so we have the full picture, is NASDAQ says you're going to go up 100 over the 10-year time period, you're going to go down 100. He or she could then just take that in plug and play with it, as opposed to having to start from scratch in January.
Yeah, I think I honestly don't think that the exercise is going to be that much work in terms of the programming. I think as a leadership team, we can have discussions around, what programming do we want to sustain, and the visionary piece, like where do we want to be in terms of programming that we might not have. And the question is then, can we fit it in without having to, again, put on a cart or, have five lunch periods. I think that is in my mind, I don't think that is a complex task. And I think we have the capacity, I think we have the expertise to do that.
Surprised you had the capacity.
The capacity is what I'm concerned about in terms of just the timing of where we are in life at this point. Keith, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Greg. I think it is something that we could tackle if we were able to free up the time to do it. But you'd want to be able to do it carefully. You want to think about really it all from all different angles and different levels. What the middle school might think is, very important is very different than what, Principal Ryan might think at an early childhood center. So we really got to think that through and how the different things are being, utilized in different ways. So yeah, I would agree with Greg. It is a task we can do. We just have to peel off the time to make it happen.
But from a question perspective, leave capacity off to the side for is there value to starting it now? I think you're saying yes, based on what Keith said, because he's saying there's a lot of thought that's going to go into it, right? Principal Ryan may say one thing today, and he might then think about the plan. He's like, oh yeah,
I guess-
maybe this or maybe that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess for me, I guess it sounds like we're trying to get 10 steps down the road before we get a couple of these milestones. And I agree with Katura. The real data set that's going to help drive the next conversation and allow us to have efficient conversations is this NASDAQ report that really we're going to receive in short order. I mean, in terms of time, the ability for us to be able to start the process. I think what we could start now is just having preliminary conversations with principals and the leadership team about what if, just planting the seeds, getting people to think outside the box. I think that would be helpful because to Katura's point earlier, the conversations that we've had have been in this group and we're back in 2013 and people haven't started the journey along with us at this point in time.
Okay.
And
Well-
also, I'll just throw one other thought out there, which is that it seems as though we already have a little bit of a starting point for understanding whether our current population could fit into 3 buildings just based on the study that was done in 2013, because the population is at a level where they said that education would be impacted. And I know that study looked at closing Neary and not Woodward. So maybe that might shift some of it a little bit, but it does seem like that question is a little bit answered by that report. However, what we don't know is future numbers and, if there's a way to totally reconfigure with renovations and whatever else. I don't know.
Okay. Kathy, are you in a position to share anything? You have co-host privileges.
I'm not, all I've done, Jason, is under the no on the first box. I said in one else, I said school model, ideal number of grades per school, use of building for town, which we're not going to do in this committee, and then the programmatic and educational needs. So that's all I've added to this so far.
Okay. So maybe next step is Katura will talk to the school committee on Monday night,
Mhm.
and then just maybe come back with what the summary of that discussion. It's a public meeting. Just any ideas that weren't really discussed here or things we need to think about. And then we really put forward kind of, I'll call it the first voted draft at the next meeting based on that, right? Because I think we've thrown a lot of darts at the wall. Some have stuck, some haven't. And then that way school committee in their next meeting or your capital subcommittee, whichever you think is the right venue, can then basically endorse it and say, yeah, we agree with these steps. We agree with these check-in points. Because I personally am concerned with the check-in points. Like I don't want to trip over an obstacle at any point and say, oh, I wish you really had talked to me before you went down these 3 steps. Or I wish you had done more before you came back and wasted my time. Right? Like I'm trying to kind of go right down the fairway on those as opposed to deviate too far left or too far right.
I agree with that in that what you're also saying is that you're asking them to think about this up front, not after we're done and we've said, yeah, we think you can close a school and this is which one you should close and this is how you should close it and da-da-da. And they go, great, but I really was bothered by so-and-so, you didn't even look at that, so I can't even get that far. So I agree that this probably does allow them to start thinking about the things that are important besides the population. But for a moment, humor me, let me just, the rest of this is kind of simple. I just want to make sure we agree that if we do decide to recommend closing a school, okay, based on population and all these other things that we're talking about. So let's say we do that. We think, yes, it's the right thing to do. We think 3 schools are better than 4 for some of the reasons Greg said, and da-da-da. Do we also agree that it's part of our charge that we not only say that, we recommend a detailed plan for doing that. We don't say, yes, you can close one, we're gone. We're going to recommend which school, and then we're going to recommend how to do it, including any rehab work that needs to be done if, for example, it's Neary.
You want to go first, Katura?
Well, I feel like that's going to be part of our analysis, right? Is if we decide that it can be done, we'll know how. So yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense that we would pass that information along.
Well, I think they'd be pretty disappointed if we didn't. If we just,
Yeah.
guess what? You can do it now. You go figure out how to do it. So in other words, we're going to figure out how to do it in addition to saying. And then what I said is, do we want to agree tonight that we are going to, in the end, if we do decide that we think a school should be closed, are we going to limit that to once we're going to pick the school? We're not going to give them. We're not going to give two choices. We're not going to analyze both schools. We will do that ourselves as far as which one's better. But we'll make that decision in our committee and then go forward with that school. Or do we want to look at both schools, stop there, go back to school committee and say, this is what it would look like for either school, and then you decide which one you want to do. So who's going to make the decision as to which school we close if we get that far?
Well, I feel like that probably is a school committee decision, but the way I'm picturing this going forward is that everything that we're doing is going to be informed by a lot of information from within the schools and the administration from an educational standpoint, and with school committee feedback at every meeting we have, and all of that, and also capital plan. I mean, I'm sure you're going to be giving updates and you'll bring back feedback too. So I don't feel like any sort of conclusion we come to is going to be out of the blue and without context. I think it'll have a lot of background and context to it, and that will be information that I hopefully at that point it'll be pretty familiar to the people who will be informed of the final decision. It's not like we're just going to pop up one day and say, hey, this is what we decided. So
Have we at least decided that if we close the school, it's going to be either Woodward or Neary? Is that at least the other two are off the table? Have we at least gotten that far?
I think we did talk about that because Finn has special configurations with restrooms and things, age appropriate stuff, and Trotter.
Trotter you cannot close. Trotter's got this, the big gym. It's got the
auditorium.
Yeah. I would say, on Finn, right, to Katura's point, you're gonna have to, for anyone to reuse that, other than a preschool, like a private preschool buying the building or something like that, you'd have to gut the entire thing and start from scratch for it to be usable to any other population.
It'd be a medical building. Just kidding.
Even that,
I know.
I was just looking. If you actually go in Neary, some of the countertops in the administrative area are basically non-functional because they're at the height of kindergarten, first grade level based on what that building was originally used for, is my understanding.
I can validate that, Jason.
Equally as important is having the architects walk through the two buildings. I think that's.
But Greg, do you agree that's the two on the table?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Trotter is not even a discussion point, and then Finn is really off the table. I think just because it's an early childhood center, it was designed for that main purpose.
And you'd have to rebuild. Not only is Jason right, you'd have to gut it to use it for something else, but you'd have to rebuild the early childhood piece in another school. So you'd have a whole lot of cost to replicate.
The heat would work, though.
Yeah, we'd have good heat.
Rogers had the same problem with heat too.
So what was the committee think about a motion on that, just to formalize that? Just that to formalize really the basically the red font at the top of Kathy's page relating to Woodward or Neary. Think we should do that?
So is Kathy screen sharing?
No, but I can.
Okay. I don't see
again,
red font.
That's why I put in red, Jason, to try to make sure that everybody agrees those are the two schools. So all we're doing, Katira, is on the first box, it says, does the projected student population of Southborough pre-K through 8 for the next 10 years support closing either Woodward or Neary based on the NASDAQ demographic study? So I put that in red to make sure we agree that that's the two schools we're looking at here and not either of the other two.
I see. I printed in black and white, so I get it.
All right, so I'm going to move
Okay.
that for purposes of advancing the conversation, that any consolidation would only involve the Woodward or Neary School. Is there a second?
Second, with a slight amendment. It doesn't mean that you can't move a grade to either Trotter or Finn. It just means that you're not closing Trotter or Finn.
All right, so I'm going to withdraw my motion. I'm going to move that for purposes of closing a school, the only schools that would be considered would be Woodward or Neary.
Second,
Any discussion? Good clarification. So do roll call. Cook,
aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Okay. So do we have a path forward on this? I think we do.
I think it's getting there.
Yeah, but look, I think this is
Yeah.
crucial to how we approach this, and I think communication and approach is going to go a long way with the ultimate result. Katura, one thing to bring back to the school committee, and I'm not sure if this matters or not, is the concept of a campus approach.
Okay.
How important, right? Like if you think about closing Neary, then essentially you'd be left with Woodward on its own, Finn on its own, Trotter on its own. As opposed to if you close Woodward, then you're really dealing with 2 school sites in town as opposed to 3. I'm not sure from an educational perspective how critical that is or isn't. I imagine it impacts what Keith deals with in terms of busing a lot. But I would like to hear more about that. And I'm not sure who the right people to hear from are, but that I think factors in here as well.
I think that's a great point. Yep.
And if we end up deciding that what we need to do, we've decided that we can close the school. We know which 2 it would be. Then we think what we need to do is then do the pros and cons of each one, quantify that, take that to school committee before we go forward so that they can weigh in on the pros and cons. That certainly, I think, might be a pro of closing Woodward.
Yes, and obviously the town will have a very strong view on a pro side to Woodward versus Neary as well.
Mhm. Okay.
Okay, so that kind of bundled item 4 and 5 on our agenda. So which item 5 was discussion and next steps while waiting for NESDEC report. So
Done.
yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and then Greg and I will talk to MSBA as far as the questions we raised in the first part of the meeting.
Do you want me to do that, Kathy, from a building perspective? I know you had done the NESDEC piece, but I'm happy to do that too if you want me to do that.
That's fine.
Okay.
I just want to make absolutely sure we understand the consequences as far as MSBA contributions toward this, because we certainly want MSBA to contribute here.
Yeah, and Greg, with your indulgence, I think it may also make sense to either have Mark or Brian from the town side on, just to round out the financial aspect of it, just given that they're the ultimate ones that administer the bonds at the end of the day.
I agree.
Okay. So let me know once you hear on that,
Yeah.
and we can coordinate schedules. So I think it makes sense to meet in 2 weeks to hear the feedback from school committee and really just chart next steps and what we're working on in the meantime. Kathy and I will be able to also report back on what the town's going to start doing and thinking about from a architect perspective. Does that still work for everyone?
Sounds good.
All right. Public comment. Is there any public comment?
Our faithful Sam.
Seeing none. Is there any other business anyone wants to talk about tonight? All right. I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead, Carol. You second.
Okay.
Kara seconded.
I'll second. Sure.
All right. Any further discussion? Roll call. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Good discussion. Have a good evening.
Okay. Thanks.
Aye.